From Knights to Nike by Katie Brooke Ross and Kinsley C. Turner. Throughout history, all sorts of things have changed. The way we view the universe, the way we view the world, and even the way we view our own bodies. This being said, the ideas of kinship and comitatus are certainly not exempt. Now you may be asking yourself, what are kinship and comitatus? In short, kinship is identity by blood relation. This basically means that you identify yourself by where you're from and who your family is. And comitatus, although it sounds fancy, is just another way of describing a war bond between a king and his noblemen. This was a really important idea in times past because it allowed kings to have loyal men to fight for them without having the monetary wealth to pay them. The kings would instead give their knights land in exchange for loyal service. So we have landowning knights in a protected kingdom. That means everything's perfect, right? Well, not so much. Over time, this idea of kinship and comitatus morphed into a completely different demon, individualistic desire. Rather than thinking in a family, group-based state of mind, people began to look at what they could do to further their own desires, and what defined you no longer came from your past. You could create the life you wanted to live. To better show you the shift in these ideas, let's take a look at some different texts written through these different periods of time. Let's explore some works where kinship was prevalent. In the Anglo-Saxon epic Beowulf, the focus is primarily on kinship rather than being on individual identity. Take, for example, lines 260 through 268. Beowulf is solely identifying himself by his allegiance in relation to the Geat people, saying, "We belong by birth to the Geat people, and owe allegiance to Lord Hygelac. We come in good faith to find your lord and nation's shield, the son of Halfdane." This is not the only instance of Beowulf being named by his kinship. He is referred to as the son of Icthau or Hygelac Thane repeatedly throughout the story. Comitatus is also prevalent in the tale of Beowulf. An example of this can be found after his heroic battle with Grendel. Beowulf is rewarded with gold, horses, and other such luxuries. This is an example of the system of comitatus where the warrior is rewarded by a king or ring giver. But to further this illustration of comitatus, Beowulf returns home and offers up his reward to King Hygelac. The Wanderer, another work from the Anglo-Saxon period, further illustrates the importance of kinship to the people of this time. There are several instances where the lone wanderer expresses his grief upon the separation from his kinsman. On line 7, he mentions the death of his kinsman. On lines 9 and 10, he says, "Not one remains alive to whom I could utter the thoughts of my heart." On line 21, he laments being far from kinfolk. Lines 27 and 28, he talks about being in the mead hall, remembering me and my kin. On line 51, it says, "Then through his mind passed memories of kinsmen." And on lines 52 and 53, it says that he eagerly gazes at his fellow warriors. His troubled feelings from lack of kinship are clearly present throughout the poem. To have no kinsman during this time was considered a fate worse than death. We can start to see these ties of kinship weakening in the poem Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Individualistic desires begin to rival kinship in the minds of the people. King Arthur's nephew, Sir Gawain, begins to desire his own individual fame, while still being willing to lay down his life in the service of his king and kin. Gawain realizes that he, as a servant of his king, is nothing, saying, "I am the weakest of your warriors and feeblest of wit. Loss of my life would be least lamented. Were I not your nephew, my life would mean nothing." You can see the idea of kinship battling with individualism, as Gawain, while still willing to give himself in service to his king, considers seeking his own glory, going on this quest where his deeds are said to be so momentous among the mountains. To tell just a tenth would be a tall order. So in these lines, you can see that Gawain is focusing more on his quest than on his life as a servant to and nephew of King Arthur. While this may not seem like a drastic change in viewpoint, the subtle shift in ideologies exhibits a major turning point in history. It's easy to see the shifts in these ideals, but why is it that they were shifting to begin with? Well, the entire class system that had defined much of the 14th and 15th centuries was crumbling under the feet of the people. One large reason for this was the rapid destruction caused by the plague. Previously, the social class was based on 3 medieval estates: nobility, clergy, and commoners. This liquidation of the class system was allowing people to change their destiny rather than being stuck in whatever life they were born into. A great example of this moving up in the class system is the life of Geoffrey Chaucer. The life of Geoffrey Chaucer is a prime example of the disintegration of the estates which had controlled life in England for so long. Chaucer was born a commoner, the son of a wine merchant, but Chaucer was not content to remain on the bottom rung of society. Chaucer was a self-made man who embodies the spirit of individuality. He eventually rose to serve in the court of the king, and his granddaughter eventually married a duke, joining the ranks of nobility. So within 3 generations, the gap from commoner to nobility was bridged, an occurrence which prior to this era would have been unheard of. Individualism truly begins to take hold in the 15th century with the rise of Renaissance humanism. This new set of beliefs and reason was heralded by revolutions in the realm of science. Because the world was seen more clearly through means of reason and study, man believed that he could better understand himself by following these same principles. Man could be what he wanted, as observed by Mirandola in his oration on the dignity of man. "We have made thee neither of heaven nor of earth, neither mortal nor immortal, so that with freedom of choice and with honor, as though the maker and moulder of thyself, thou mayest fashion thyself in whatever shape thou shalt prefer." This self-made man led to the demise of kinship, as this new man was focused on promoting himself. In the tragedy of Shakespeare's King Lear, we can truly see the demise of the ideals of kinship and comitatus. While there are a few characters who remain faithful to the outdated system, the play itself focuses on the selfish efforts of Goneril, Regan, and Edmund to further advance themselves in the quest for money and power. Kent is one of the few who still hold true to the old-fashioned ideas of kinship and comitatus. In lines 140 and 142, Kent describes how he has always been faithful in his service to Lear as follows: "Royal Lear, whom I have ever honored as my king, loved as my father, as my master followed." Kent's declaration of loyalty clearly demonstrates his ties to the previous system of loyalty to one's kin and king. Contrastingly, Goneril, Regan, and Edmund can be seen as solely being worried about their own needs and the furtherment of their ranks. Goneril and Regan are plotting heavily on how to dethrone their father and assume more of his power in lines 285 through 305. Edmund can also be seen partaking in these sly actions by deceiving Edgar and causing him to flee to further his own agenda. At one point, after receiving so much grief from his daughters, Lear refers to them as diseases of the flesh, boils, and plague sores. This certainly does not fit with the previous tight familial bonds that were associated with those who highly valued kinship. John Donne illustrates this change in perspectives perfectly in An Anatomy of the World, First Anniversary. He speaks about the dissolution of the class system in lines 215 through 218, where he says, "Prince, subject, father, son, are all things forgot. For every man alone thinks he hath got to be a phoenix, and that there can be none of that kind of which he is but he." Donne perfectly exhibits how the idea of individualism has completely devoured that of kinship and comitatus. In this newfound perspective, people believe themselves to be one of a kind. There are no two people alike. This idea also seeks to further the ability of one to change their fate. As Donne says, princes and subjects, fathers and sons have been forgotten. The potential for what one can be is endless with this class system no longer in place. Donne's view on the error in individualism aligns with principles taught in the Bible relating how we are to see ourselves and others in the light of Christ. We should remember Romans 12:3, which states, "For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. We are to put Christ first and others second. We are to be last, and our individual goals should mirror the will of God rather than following the fleeting passions of this world. We are, in respect, serving the Lord in a system very similar to that of comitatus. We serve the Lord because in his love for us, Christ died to save us. We are now serving him and storing up treasures in heaven, not unlike the earthly things." So where are we left today? Well, as I'm sure you can all imagine, Western culture is all about promoting the individual. Companies market towards the individual, and consumers devour the idea of unleashing their own potential in any way they wish. Take Nike's ad, Unlimited You, for example. Their promotion of this never-ending potential is incredibly appealing to those who share this fascination with individualism. Having the idea that one can mold themselves into anything they wish obviously aligns with the beliefs of individualistic identity. So as we can see, these ideas have changed quite a bit over time. But now we're left with the question of what is right. Well, as with any system of beliefs, there are flaws on either side. In a sense, there must be a gray in between these black and white ideas. What we can be sure of is the impact that following these changes through these texts can have on our lives. We can see the evolution of both sides, and by careful study, maybe we can find a healthy medium moving forward for generations to come. Ultimately, however, in order to truly understand which better aligns with Christian beliefs, our only options are to pray and diligently study Scripture.
This script was written by Kinsley C. Turner and Katie Brooke Ross. Narrated by Kinsley C. Turner. Illustrated by Katie Brooke Ross. Produced by Ross Turner Incorporated. Special thanks to Ben Barefoot, boyfriend, Rhonda Ross, mom, and Megan Camp, friend, for the markers, paper, and artistic abilities, and to Carla C. McManus for the voice and the ability to speak at lightning speeds.